Hi, welcome to America at its Best. My name is Rebecca Painter, and I'll be your host for today's show. I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us and see how your partnership is making good things happen all across the country. Today, we are going to be joined by Connor Boyack, who is the president of the Libertas Institute in Utah. Now, some of you guys might already know Connor as the author of the awesome Tuttle Twins books. Side note, if you are looking for a gift for your children or your grandchildren, you should check them out. Alyssa will put the link in the chat in just a moment for later. But Connor's not coming to us today to talk about his Tuttle Twin books. We can do that another show. He's coming to tell us about how he and his team have positioned Utah to be the state where the next big thing in innovation could happen. We'll hear from Connor in just a moment. First, let's check in with SPN's President and CEO, Miss Tracy Sharp, coming to us from California. Tracy, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be back. Great to be back, Rebecca. How are you doing?
Doing great. So Tracy, I know that this topic matters a great deal to you. Why are you so interested in hearing what Connor has to say today?
Sure. We're living through rapidly changing times, both as we emerge from a pandemic, thankfully, but we also now face dramatic shifts in policy coming out of DC. The velocity of change may seem daunting, but we see tremendous opportunity to use our state solutions to push back against the feds. But in order to do that in today's world, we need speed and flexibility. That is essential. And that's part of what I'm looking forward to hearing about from our guest today.
That's great. And I understand SPN has also launched a new program that will help accelerate some of this innovation, especially in this post-COVID world. Can you tell us about that?
2 years ago, we started a program called Launchpad, and it's an event where we bring in venture capitalists and policy entrepreneurs to ruthlessly critique a handful of promising new innovations that our network leaders want to test out in the States. Real quick, how it works is over 3 days at this event, each of these experimental projects goes through a rigorous feedback process, with the end result being that each project is more ready for prime time. In short, our Launchpad event is like hitting the fast forward button where ideas come out as a vetted plan. Now, some ideas don't survive the process, but those that do see an accelerated implementation with lawmakers or in private industry. You do this enough out in the States and you'll see more momentum for solutions bubbling up to challenge DC.
Well, and Tracy, Connor's idea did make it through the event and past the final stages of the process, and now it's going to be making a difference all across the country. Let's bring Connor on and hear about his idea and how he changed the state of Utah. Hi, Connor, welcome back to the show. It's so good to see you.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, Connor, we talked a little bit about Launchpad, but let's back up for a second. First, help us understand the problem you were trying to solve in Utah, because a lot of people look at Utah as a fairly business-friendly state from the get-go.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, when I founded Libertas close to a decade ago, I had a lot of people, prospective donors, ask, like, why do we need this? We're in a red state. We're at the top of all the best in business rankings and best state for this, that, and the other. And my response was, well, yes, we're getting all those accolades, but we're being graded on a curve. It just means we're doing less bad than everyone else, but that doesn't mean that there's not problems. And true to form, in the past 10 years, every single year, we have had to help an innovative company, whether it's big ones like Tesla and Uber and Airbnb, or small businesses and entrepreneurs who do things differently than the way that they were done in the past, whose business model or product or service is different from the regulations or laws that were set up decades ago. And so every year that we've had in existence, we've had these different policy battles. And so we were trying to, when we came to Launchpad, we're trying to think out of the box and say, what can we do differently that's more forward looking and proactive, rather than all these reactive battles where we're fighting after the fact and trying to legalize these new entrepreneurial type of business models and companies.
It's interesting that you're making the statement that being less bad than other states for a bar that was already set too low wasn't good enough for you or your team. So make this a little more real for me. Who is actually getting hurt by being, the best of the worst, lowest bar?
Okay, I have an example to share. Guy I now call a friend named Alex. He set up a pretty innovative company. Many of the participants out there viewing this are probably familiar with healthcare sharing ministries. These are kind of a healthcare cooperative, not quite insurance. This guy, Alex, decided to do something similar, but for car maintenance. You need a new transmission, a new engine. Sometimes that can cost you thousands of dollars. What if instead you could kind of chip in a little bit of money each month, almost like an insurance plan? And then when you had a big expense, it would be covered. So he goes to the insurance department. He's like, hey, I got this idea. And they're like, oh, that's not insurance. We're not going to regulate you. So he invests his life savings, $250,000, starts growing this company. People love it. No complaints, no problems. The insurance department comes back and says, actually, your insurance, that's illegal. You're not allowed to do it. Loses his life saving, has to shut the company down. There were no complaints, no problems, no lawsuits, no nothing, other than the bureaucrats shutting him down and him lacking the ability, like the big companies, to muscle his way through, hire lobbyists. He just couldn't do that. He didn't have the right capital or connections to do it. Lost everything, pivoted, moved on with his life. And now consumers are deprived of that service because there wasn't that flexibility a few years ago when he tried. So it's for those little guys that we're trying to create a new regulatory model so that these entrepreneurial endeavors can thrive.
Wow. So tell us about this idea you had to change everything so that your friend and others like him could actually accomplish what they set out to do.
So we actually didn't come up with the idea of the regulatory sandbox. It started in the UK in 2014.
Wait, can I interrupt you before you tell? Okay,
Please.
You say regulatory sandbox. I've heard this tossed around. It conjures up an image of bureaucrats making sandcastles. First, can you tell us what it is, and then tell us where it came from?
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me clarify. In the development IT world, a sandbox is like a testing ground where you can test out your code, your software, before you launch it into the real world. So that's where the term comes from. A regulatory sandbox then is a legal system or process where companies can operate under a lower regulatory environment. So for example, company X says, I'll use my friend Alex. Alex would say, hey, I've got this quasi-insurance company. I want to operate, but I don't want to abide by that particular law or that regulation. And so you're in this kind of regulatory safe space, if you will, where certain laws or regulations just don't apply to you for a limited period of time under the careful supervision of regulators with reporting to legislators and the public, so that when you exit the sandbox, hopefully by then the lawmakers have caught up. They've amended the law. They've said, hey, look, there's no problem here. Let's remove or reduce this regulatory barrier. That is the idea behind a regulatory sandbox. Okay. And it started in the UK with fintech or financial technology companies. There was a gentleman in Arizona a few years ago who took the initiative in their kind of state bureaucracy to pioneer a fintech. This was the first one in the country. So we quickly saw with a like-minded legislator in Utah that thing happening in Arizona. We then learned about the UK. We said, we got to do this as well. So we then also did this initial sandbox just for that one industry. But what we tried to think of is like, how can we expand this to not just benefit that industry, but many others? And that's right when SPN actually launched the Launchpad. And so it was the perfect opportunity for us to take it there, vet the idea, tear it down, build it back up, and then have a game plan to lead us to where we are today.
Wow, Tracy, when Connor took this idea to Launchpad, did you see a big difference in how the idea started versus where it ended up?
Oh, for sure. Look, the Launchpad treatment is not for the faint of heart. And I think leaders that come in are those that are willing to endure the criticism and the rigorous feedback cycle. And that's Connor. He had the humility and the drive to want to accelerate and improve his idea. So I think a lot of these ideas come in green. I think Connor's was a little further along, but they come out as, vetted and tested in a way that makes it more ready for prime time with lawmakers, or in some cases in private industry. I love the example that Connor gave of getting this idea from the UK and then from Arizona, right? These laboratories of democracy sharing the good ideas. This is something we love to accelerate from state to state. And I think Connor's done that really generously with this idea, which I'm sure you guys are going to want to talk about.
Yeah, so Connor, tell us, you're finished with Launchpad, you came back with a new iteration of the idea. What happened next?
So our goal at Launchpad was to say, here's this new innovative idea. We think for all of our efforts across the country for decades to try and deregulate, think of being an elected official. You campaign on cutting the red tape, and then you go and then you look around and you're like, okay, what do I do? Where's the red tape? Like, how do I find the actual problems? The sandbox inverts it a little bit. It's kind of the opposite. It allows businesses to step forward and kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I want to operate without that law or regulation. So it aligns the incentives so that now policymakers can have the businesses coming to them and better identifying these problems. And so we came to Launchpad, we say, here's this idea. We want to be the first state in the country to have a sandbox, not just for one industry, but all industries. No one had done this before. And then we want to scale it to other states through the SPN network. And then we want to get the federal government to have a federal sandbox, because that's where the real problems are. That's where the heaviest regulatory barriers are. And we had learned a little bit from Goldwater, who had done this with Right to Try just before that. They had been out there in the states getting a lot of Right to Try passes. They then Right to Try laws passed. And then they had success at the federal level. And so that was in the back of our minds of saying, here's a model that we can pursue for regulatory reform. Let's go to Launchpad. We came out of Launchpad. As Tracy said, the idea was torn down and rebuilt with all that. I think Tracy used the word endure, which I think was a good word for it. We endured Launchpad, but came out with a game plan. And we had a 3-year timeline. Our first plan was, let's get some of these industry specific sandboxes going. So next we did insurance, the insurance industry, kind of a nod to our friend Alex, whose story I shared, where there's a clear need. The courts in Utah became the first in the country to have a legal services sandbox, so that attorneys and legal service companies can have a lower set of restrictions to practice law.
So maybe our attorneys' fees will be a little lower these days?
Hopefully, that's the goal.
Thank you. Okay.
That's the goal. And then the plan was, let's get a few of these industry specific ones, and then we'll go for the all-inclusive. Well, then COVID happened. We weren't planning for a whole nother year to introduce to our legislature the idea of an all-inclusive or economy-wide, regulatory sandbox. But then our legislative leaders, the governor, they're like, how can we boost economic recovery? How can we get people back to work? How can we help our entrepreneurs? How can we, all these things? And we're like, hey guys, we've got an idea. We were going to wait a few months to talk to you about it, but it really accelerated the adoption of the country's first all-inclusive sandbox, which passed unanimously in our legislature. Just yesterday, we had a signing with the governor for this bill. And now already we're talking with SPN partners across the country about following in our footsteps and how we can help them so that we can achieve that second phase of our Launchpad plan, which was, let's not have this stay in Utah. Let's get a lot of other states on board as well.
Connor, that's incredible. How long are these regulations suspended?
So it depends on the specific law that you set up. What we did is we did a 2-year program. And why we did that is, as I said, in our past years, we've had all these free market fights with protectionists and incumbent companies. And what we've seen historically is that it takes 2 legislative sessions to get it done. In the first one, you kind of have the fight, and the protectionists don't want to, repeal their law that benefits them. And then in the off season or the interim, there's negotiations and conversations. And then they come back to the second legislative session the following year. And then there's some kind of compromise law that legalizes that new innovative activity. So we've seen consistently 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. And so that's how we set up the sandbox, so that there's sufficient time for the legislature to see what's happening in the sandbox, to see that the speculative worries of all the incumbents, because they always say, oh, but if we don't have this law, all these bad things will happen. Now we can test this out. We can gather data, call them out on whether or not those fears are substantiated. And then policymakers can make a smarter decision based on that information, so that when these companies come out of the sandbox, they have that lower regulatory barrier to abide by.
That's amazing. Connor, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you are not stopping in Utah. You're working with your fellow CEOs across State Policy Network to get this going in other states and eventually hope to force a federal change. Can you tell us a little more specifically which states are eyeing this and how it's iterating across the country?
Yeah, there's a number of states already doing this. We've got Missouri and Wyoming, Florida, Tennessee, West Virginia. There's a bunch of states, several of which are in. The SPN has a working group that we lead specifically for these regulatory sandboxes, and so there's a lot of these partners out there. What I will say is there are also legislators out there who are doing this on their own. Several of the states, the SPN partners are not yet engaged, but we're hoping to do that and get them on board. But you've got policymakers across the country who are hearing about this in the news or at various conferences. We're going to be at ALEC, which is hosted here in Utah this year, sharing this on some panels. And so we're seeing a lot of interest even outside of the SPN network with these legislators who want to do this. And we want to make sure they have the support from their SPN think tank in their state. And so there's a lot of interest. And this is something in the next year or two, we're going to be leaning into a lot more to make sure that we can provide not just the model legislation, but resources and information and all the learning that we've been able to accumulate, again, which goes back to our Launchpad kind of plan, which included us helping scale this to other states so that we can then together go to the federal government after that.
Yeah, I love this process. And Connor mentioned what Goldwater Institute had done with Right to Try, that by gaining momentum and passing it in legislatures in numerous states, they reached a tipping point where you have enough states where the feds just can't ignore it any longer. And that's the path. That's what we've laid out with Connor's plans. And his generosity was sharing this information in other states and helping legislators and other state think tanks customize it. It speeds up the whole process.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, let's turn it over to Q&A from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A sign at the bottom of the screen, and we'll jump right in. Connor, first question is actually from Debbie Gatte. Which kind of organizations are eligible to apply for Launchpad? Tracy, we'll let you take that.
Yeah. It's an open application process, but it is a rigorous application process. You can find that information on our website, spn.org/launchpad. I think that's in the chat. So it's not just limited to SPN affiliates. We're looking for any ally and entrepreneur and innovator who wants to make a difference in their state with some experimental project that we can put through this process. It's just the application process is, we have a lot of applications, not many make it through it, but it really is helpful to generate a lot of ideas.
Thank you, Tracy. Next question from Brian Balfour. What is the most common objection you face from opponents to this proposal, Connor, and how do you address it?
So part of the benefit here is this is a very new model, so you don't have entrenched opponents who are very familiar. As on this call, I say regulatory sandbox and people are like, huh, what is that? And so it doesn't trigger people like, going after unions or, one of these things. And so we haven't had to face a lot of opposition. There are regulators who are very, by their nature, cautious and wanting to make sure that this doesn't get out of hand. And if Tesla wants to innovate with their self-driving, hey, can we suspend the stoplight laws? So like nothing like that is going to happen. In fact, the law requires that if it has anything to do with public health or public safety or consumer protection, those types of regulations are not on the table for suspension under the regulatory sandbox. And so by carving that out, regulators became way more comfortable and recognizing that, like, look, there's stuff on the books from decades past or even in recent years that could not foresee some of the changes in the economy or new innovations by entrepreneurs. And so we actually had some very productive conversations with these regulators who you might perceive to have been opponents, but really they were allies. They want to do good at their job. And by and large, they don't want to be punitive. They don't want to be in the press that they're the problem for this new company that everyone loves. And so they just want to make sure that things are done safely. And so by us making sure that we carve out public safety issues, it resolved a lot of those concerns. And frankly, there was very little opposition or concern anyways. There was so much excitement about a new innovative policy idea. Just yesterday, our governor was talking up how amazing this idea is and how excited he is about it. These elected officials recognize that they can't always predict the future. When they're there making laws, they try their best, but inevitably they're going to get it wrong, which is why laws are constantly amended year after year. But how amazing to have a program that can kind of foresee those unintended consequences and allow a little bit of a release valve for that pressure that's created by their problematic law that did not foresee that future innovative thing. So it was a very welcome thing for these policymakers, and really not a lot of opposition so far to date.
Well, that's great to hear, especially because we've been talking so much about K-12 education reform and healthcare and all of these things that feel like they're right in front of our face. It's a little weird that the conversation around reg reform has just been so quieted when now is the time to really do it. And that brings me into my next question from Ed Johnson. Ed, welcome back to the show. I'm glad you're here with us. Ed says, if it's beneficial for startups to have fewer regulations, why not take a bigger step to just reduce a bunch of them all at once?
That's a fair question. The challenge, I'll say, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is that there has been a lot of interest over the years in reducing regulation. But policymakers don't always know how to do that. When they sit around in a committee and say, hey, let's look at the code for agriculture today and see what we can find, like, you just don't know where to look. And so this provides a forum in which the entrepreneurs can be the ones stepping forward and signal what needs to be reduced. Another important answer to Ed's question is that right now what happens when an innovative company goes to the legislature and says, hey, we do things a bit differently, we'd like to amend this law, inevitably you have a battle with the incumbents on the other side. And it's what I call a low information fight. And what that means is that the policymaker caught in the middle of this battle doesn't have data. It's just he said, she said, and lobbyists twisting arms, and there's not good data upon which to make a decision. Here comes the sandbox where we can do these little trials for these companies to come into the sandbox. And then when they come out, when it's time to have the conversation about reducing those regulations, policymakers have a lot of information. They can see, were there any complaints? Were there any lawsuits? Was there any actual harm? Or are all of the worries from the incumbent companies or the protectionists unfounded? If so, great, let's go repeal that regulation. And so it gives a lot more of political cover to legislators who otherwise might have been nervous to just repeal a regulation or reduce some of these barriers. Now they can see, well, look, they were in the sandbox for 2 years, nothing happened, so let's fix it. And it gives a lot more confidence, I think, to these policymakers who want to deregulate, but they just don't know which regulations need to be cut, and they don't know what problems might be unintentionally created if they do. Now they have a little bit of a trial run in which to test this out, gather information, and then make those decisions. And so it actually empowers these legislators to deregulate where the interest is already there. They've just lacked the mechanics to be able to effectively get it done on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, this is a tremendous way to positively engage with state legislators and continue to build our relationships with them to help them with this evidence and these case studies and the data, so that they then, if we can make their job easier, we're happy to do it. So I think that's a great example.
Me too. Connor, last question also from Ed. Where do you see regulation that actually holds value and might need to stay? And you mentioned public safety earlier. Is there anything else?
Yeah, that's an important question, and something that we had to address as we worked on this bill is that we're not looking to upend the very traditional things that keep people safe and kind of the basis of valid law, which is just making sure people don't harm one another. We don't want people to be defrauded and things like this. And so when we crafted our model legislation, we were very intentional to say, if the regulator, when they're reviewing this request for this sandbox, it first goes to the regulator and they get to say, am I okay with this? Am I not? And there's some different checks and balances and due process built into this. So the regulator can't just veto it and then that's the end of the story. It's kind of a collaborative decision with several stakeholders, but the regulator gets the first bite of the apple. And if they feel that suspending this particular regulation or state law would create harm or create actual problems, they have the opportunity to articulate that. And if there's any kind of rational basis for that, if there's any reason to suspect that suspending this particular law or regulation will create harm, then they can say no, and that's really the end of the story. But importantly, all of the information, including those rejections, flows into the legislature and to groups like us so that we can see, well, look, this company tried, they were denied, but let's go have a conversation with them and see if we can thread the needle a bit more to still protect public safety, but maybe put some boundaries around that regulation so that there's not superfluous or extra burdens outside of that core ideal, it's just going to surface a lot of this information so that even if a sandbox isn't approved for safety reasons, we're still going to be able to go have a conversation and see if we can get a better balance rather than just saying outright yes or no. So we're really excited because the economic development people in our state and the regulators and the legislators all have recognized that this model empowers them to make better decisions. It helps them do what they want, which was to have a thriving economy and support businesses and benefit consumers, but they've really lacked tools to do that. And so as we talk to them about this regulatory sandbox concept, albeit a bit of a wonky term, they quickly latched onto the idea that this can actually help them do their jobs better. And for that reason, they've all been cheerleading this concept since we first introduced it.
Thanks, Connor. And another question came in as you were answering that one. How do you fit COVID experimentation into this model?
What was interesting about COVID is numerous governors wrote executive orders in which they suspended various laws and regulations to provide for flexibility, especially in the health space, but outside of it as well. And I know many of our partners in SPN across the country are looking for ways to get the legislatures to make those changes permanent. Again, if the flexibility afforded by those executive orders did not cause, cats and dogs to marry and the sky didn't fall, then why do we have them at all? And can we make these things permanent? And that's been an important part of our work in the States, specifically on those executive orders. But beyond just the executive orders, what I will say is that as we've talked to partners and legislators across the country about sandboxes, even in blue states, there's a broader recognition of the need for flexibility. COVID has really awoken this sense of these rigid processes and systems need to better adapt. We need to help the small business owner who's right now getting checks from the government because they're out of a job. If we can create opportunities for them to thrive and succeed, how amazing is that? And so even our friends in blue states are saying that this can empower people with upward economic mobility. It can give them more regulatory flexibility so that, yes, we're still protecting public health and safety, but we're focused on making sure that people have an opportunity to thrive in a more flexible legal and regulatory environment. And so COVID has shifted the narrative for that and really afforded us an opportunity in the States to say, hey guys, here's a system that will allow you to implement that flexibility, not just one time with an executive order on a short-term basis, but to create these long-term systems that can help our entrepreneurs far into the future.
Yeah, that's such a great point that COVID created the opportunity to write large that if the faster you can adapt, the need to be able to adapt and to remove barriers to speed and flexibility can help literally save lives. So I think this is a way that we can continue to expand this narrative in the future.
Yeah. Well, Connor, Tracy, thank you guys for joining us today. Let's give you guys just a quick few seconds for final thoughts. Connor, we'll start with you.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here and share this. Launchpad was great for us in really accelerating our success. So thank you to SPN and it's fun for us. We've been around a decade and we've been, we started as a state-based think tank, one of many, but we're growing a lot. And this is one of a few policies that we have been the first in the entire country to pass. And so as an organization, we're in a bit of transformation in the past year where kind of like Goldwater, who I mentioned, we're now working in all kinds of different states and being able to help a number of legislators and SPN groups do what we did and empower them. It's exciting for me as the founder of the organization. And it's fun to see the human impact of these policies and benefiting people across the country. So very excited to have platforms like this to share what we're up to and get other people to help us along the way. So thank you again.
Thank you, Connor. Tracy, final thoughts.
Sure. I want to thank Connor in particular. We have so many innovative leaders out in this network. And these shows, these America at its Best shows, gives us a chance to highlight some of their great work. Our leaders are out there identifying and standing up these new ideas like the regulatory sandbox. And so our role at SPN is to come alongside them to help them start up. And then through Launchpad, we can help them scale up. So what you see out in the States is an ongoing process that we work to accelerate where we stand up, start up, and scale up innovative ideas. And if we can repeat that over and over out in the States, it leads to national impact. So kudos to our leaders like Connor for all the work they've done and seizing this opportunity. I also want to say that Launchpad, we have a national Launchpad event, but we've also started doing some state level Launchpad events too. So our viewers will get to hear more about this in the future.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. And I just want to echo everything Connor and Tracy said, and also just thank all of you who are watching today, who've been giving to SPN and to our network groups for many years. You guys have made this possible. And this episode in particular was such a good reminder that it doesn't matter what's happening in Washington, D.C., we can still make good things happen, not just in Utah, but all across the country. And we talk about state solutions having national impact, but we're seeing it all the time. And I know you guys are frustrated. I know this is a hard time for the country, and I know you're not happy about what's happening in DC, but you are making it happen in the States. So we're going to keep on fighting, and thank you for everything you have done and continue to do in partnership with SPN. We'll see you next month, the next show. Bye.